Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Peters, and thank you to both of our nominees this morning. We are very grateful for your public service. We're grateful to your families for sharing that service with you, and we are grateful for your presence here today. Mr. Vitiello, I want to start by just thanking you for visiting with me in my office last month. We discussed many things, including New Hampshire's significant Indonesian community. As you know, many members of this community came to New Hampshire fleeing religious persecution against Christians in Indonesia. They have become members of the community, they have worked jobs and paid taxes, they've raised their families in the seacoast area of New Hampshire. Now, after many years of them living in the country, ICE has prioritized them for deportation, a decision that could put their lives at risk if they return to a country where violence against religious minorities remains a really serious issue. During our meeting, you committed to looking into this matter. Could you please tell me what the product of that review was, and whether, as Director of ICE, you would reconsider ICE's efforts to deport these members of the community?
Thank you for that question. So we're in a situation where in the past, people were made to believe that the immigration laws or people that were subject to removal in the United States wouldn't be arrested. I've done this job for a really long time.
So let me just interrupt you because I have limited time. Did you do a review of that situation?
Yes, we looked into it. And the situation involves people who have had either final orders of removal and have had their due process rights. They're not subject to relief under the asylum laws as refugees from Indonesia, and so they're in fact removable. The direction that we got from the President early on in his tenure was that no classes of aliens would be exempt from immigration enforcement.
So your answer to me is that even though these people have built lives in the United States, even though they sought asylum and they are in legitimate fear of religious persecution and violence should they return to their countries of origin, even though they are tax-paying, even though they have built businesses, even though their families are here, and even though there are many more people who are actually engaged in criminal behavior who ICE could be prosecuting, you all are going to continue to prioritize Granite Staters who have built lives in this country and sought justice from us.
We're not going to prioritize people just because of where they're from or what scenario that we're having. We prioritize, like we always have, threats to public safety.
But you haven't always, because these people relied on behavior and statements from the United States government that gave them the belief that they would be able to stay here and build families here and build lives here and become parts of the community. And they relied on those representations by the United States government, whether they were technically correct under the law or not. The concept of justice does not lie just in technicalities. It lies in the way we treat people, and it lies in an observance of our core values. So I am trying to understand why, when there are people violating our core values in this country without documentation or illegally, we are not prioritizing them, and why we are prioritizing law-abiding Indonesians who have been living in our country as Americans for a long time.
We are prioritizing threats to Homeland Security, threats to public safety, and those who engage in criminal activity and are also in the country illegally. So
you're telling me that you have done all that work and there's nobody else to go after who are more of a threat than these law-abiding people in my state?
No, I can tell you that as a country, as an agency, and as an individual, I recognize that sometimes the law doesn't do what we want it to do. We are a compassionate nation that is welcoming to immigrants. These people have gone through their constitutional due process rights, and they're not subject to relief under the Immigration and Nationality Act. And so when encountered by an immigration officer, they're subject to arrest and removal.
I'm not going to stay on this subject because I have another one I want to cover, but I do want to say that I don't think that that's an accurate representation of what has happened in their case. It isn't that people just happened upon them. They had been given reliances by the United States government that they were in compliance and they could stay here. And so, and they showed up for their regular check-in, and all of a sudden the behavior of the United States government changed towards them. So let's move on to another subject, because I want to follow up on something that Senator Peters was talking to you about. Because also during our meeting, we talked about indefinite detention of families and the policy of separating children from the families. And we specifically discussed the long-term mental health implications of both practices. At the end of that meeting, I provided you with a copy of a report issued by the American Academy of Pediatrics from March 2017 that stated that detention, and this is a quote, can cause psychological trauma and induce long-term mental health risks for children. And Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that a copy of that report, which I have with me, be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. So I asked in our meeting that you read the report, and you promised you would. So do you agree with the findings from our pediatricians that detention can cause long-term mental health problems for children?
I thank you for providing the report. I did read it thoroughly, and I understand the American Pediatrics Association's comments and direction and the import of the report. I understand what it means. I would like I said earlier, that we weren't in a situation where large numbers of families with children are approaching the border. But that's not the situation that we're in.
So you then are accepting the findings of the American Academy of Pediatrics that detention results in long-term psychological harm to children. Is that correct?
I think any time a parent breaks the law and their family
that is not my question. Earlier in response to Senator Peters, you referred to children as if they were tools to impose consequences on their parents. They are not. They are children.
That's not the premise that I talked about.
Well, then you should clarify your remarks. So what I'm asking you now is, will you accept the findings of pediatricians in the United States of America that detaining children provides long-term psychological harm to those children? Yes or no?
I understand the report, yes.
Okay. So one of the most basic qualifications we ask of nominees is that they use their judgment to the best of their ability to protect our core American values. So could you please tell me how you are going to advocate so that children will not be detained and children will not be separated from their families?
Well, luckily the President stopped the zero-tolerance implementation as it related to families. So any family that comes into custody at ICE, referred from CBP or from other means, are either kept together or they're released on alternatives to detention.
And what I would like to understand as well is what the alternatives to detention are. I would like a commitment that you all will stop pursuing permission to detain children and to change the Flores settlement, and that you will stand up for American values, which says we don't bully children.
Again, I'd like to be in a place where large numbers of people weren't bringing their children to the border or sending their children away.
We are the United States of America. You did a very excellent job in your testimony of standing up for the men and women who work for ICE. And I have visited with them. I have visited with our Border Patrol officials who are wonderful public servants. And here's the thing. We have the capacity in the United States of America to control our borders without harming children. That is something that I am quite confident we can do. So what I would like to do is move from a situation where you and some of your colleagues are trying to defend what happened or trying to talk about the difficulty of families on the border as an excuse, and I'd like you to start moving forward for solutions that protect children while securing our borders. Both are possible, because we're the United States. We do hard things.
I agree.
So could you commit to working with us to do that?
I will work with this committee on changes in the law that allow us to enforce the border and have an immigration system that has integrity, and I appreciate your advocacy for the ICE workforce.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hassan.
Thank you for letting me